Here, we look at the effect of exercise intensity on the metabolic fuel mixture. Before getting into what the graph itself has to show, a couple of introductory comments. First is, at rest, almost all the energy, or the preponderance of the energy supporting basal activities of muscle cells, comes from fat breakdown. We'll skip the discussion of the biochemistry of all this, but suffice to say that in the resting state, we can afford to take plenty of time to produce ATP, and so the usage of fats makes sense. Fat breakdown is a pretty slow process in producing ATP, so we can wait for it. Another comment is there's almost no level of exercise that uses a sole nutrient source. Almost always a combo. That is fat and carbohydrate breakdown. Probably the closest we could get to some sort of activity that uses a single nutrient would be a full-out sprint, where carbohydrate and pre-existing creatine phosphate and ATP, the latter two of which are not nutrients themselves, but they come from nutrient, or they're produced from nutrient breakdown. Those sources account for almost all energy use during the sprint. As far as the carbohydrate degradation, that would be mostly glycolytic because it's so fast. The Krebs cycle and electron transport chain activities are aerobic and just too slow. Now, looking at the graph itself, at low levels of activity, notice that we have our combination of fat breakdown, shown with the solid red line, and carbohydrate breakdown, the dashed red line. At the lowest of lows, that is essentially at rest, here and here, most of the energy is going to come to produce ATP is going to come from fat breakdown. That's the solid red line. And less is going to come from breakdown of carbohydrates. You knew that because we just discussed it a few moments ago. But as the exercise level starts to creep upwards, notice that there's a shifting in the use of fats versus carbohydrates. The carbohydrate degradation usage climbs faster than that of fats. That's logical, because as exercise intensity climbs, we need ATP more quickly. And so naturally, we're going to depend on carbohydrate breakdown to get it. And that differential is especially obvious at higher levels of activity. We need to say this, I think. Although it's true that fats produce more ATP per gram than carbohydrates, carbohydrate catabolism is actually more efficient. It produces more ATP per unit O2 consumed. And there's several reasons for this. On the average, glucose-derived electrons enter the electron transport chain earlier than those derived from fats. And also, ATP use rates supported by fat oxidation are only about 2/3 those obtained for glycogen oxidation. This suggests that glycogen use generates more power by producing more ATP per second, and that's just perfect for increasing exercise intensity. Then at very high levels of exercise intensity, that is up in this region, the availability of oxygen becomes limiting. As a result, our aerobic breakdown of carbohydrates and fats starts to drop, and the anaerobic breakdown of carbohydrates in glycolysis begins to climb. The moral of the story here is that if the need for ATP is urgent, it's most likely going to come from carbohydrate breakdown.